A few years ago, there was a time traveler by the name of John Titor, and he talked about mad cow disease. He talked about civil war. He talked about other catastrophes. And then, as quickly as he appeared on the Internet, he disappeared. Oliver Williams is the website editor of the time travel story of John Titor. He first saw John Titor's Internet postings in the fall of 2002, and after reading many of the sites where John was discussed, it amazed Oliver as to how much polarization and confrontation John's posts caused. Oliver soon realized that part of the problem was that there was no one place where all the posts could be easily assembled and seen. In early 2003, Oliver gathered the posts that John had left online and edited them into a single website. The website also contains email and news events that point to subjects that John spoke about. Oliver doesn't know if John was a real time traveler or not, but he says what still amazes him about the posts is their ability to draw you in, question your sanity for thinking that it might be real, and then simply scare you to death after seeing events unfold, as John has said. Hey, Oliver, welcome back.
It's good to talk to you again.
You know, all these events that have been going on since I talked to you in October, some of them seem to be pinpointed exactly the way that John Titor had talked about. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things he talked about, Oliver. Of course, the story that I just had, mad cow disease, he talked a lot about that, didn't he?
Yes, he mentioned that. Actually, he mentioned that more often than just about anything else he said, except how his time machine worked.
Constantly new people coming to coast, and some of them might not know about John Titor. Why don't you fill us in a little bit more?
Oh, absolutely. It started in 2000, in November of 2000, for a period of 4 months. A person calling themselves John Titor went on the Internet, and they went into various chat rooms and forums, and they started telling a tale about how they were a time traveler from the year 2036. And it wasn't just a haphazard story. He or she or whoever it was gave very detailed information about who they were, why they were here, how the time machine worked, and they went on to make statements and comments about our future that many people have considered to be predictions. I first became aware of it about a year or so after the person had left. And it was very annoying trying to go around to all these different sites to read what he had posted. So I collected it all in one spot, and that's how my website got started. I started getting email from people with news stories and with their comments and ideas, and that's basically how the site took off. And I tell you, today it's evolved into some weird social phenomenon. I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at the site, but there's a documentary with Michio Kaku in it now about John Titor. Also, I've heard rumors that someone's doing a comic book now. So, you know, regardless of what you think about the predictions, his story and his attitude towards us has definitely struck a nerve somewhere.
There's no doubt about that. You know, when you think about time travel in today's era, you say, generally most people say impossible, can't be done. However, if you think about it in his time period, 2036, it might be possible. And if it is possible then, Oliver, then the possibility is pretty huge that someone like John Titor or others might want to go back into time.
Oh, I agree. I'll tell you another interesting point to make is that back when John was here, if you were to talk about multiple dimensions and time travel and anything like that, you would have been written off as ridiculous. And I've even heard comments by Michio Kaku now saying that they honestly believe that multiple dimensions, not only are they real, but they're spending money now trying to find them.
Yes, Michio believes there could be thousands and thousands of them.
So we're seeing sort of a gradual acceptance of something that was said by some guy on the Internet that was crazy, and now people are starting to take it a little more seriously.
This time period of 2036, did John Titor talk specifically about it, what was going on during that time period?
Yes. In fact, that was one of the reasons why he ended up coming back in time. The future that John described was not very pleasant. There had been a period of civil war in the United States. There had been a World War III. He talked about what led up to that, you know, some of the things people are pointing to now saying, oh, that's exactly what's happening. So the world that John lived in was not a very pleasant place, and it was different. But he also described community life as being much closer together. People grew closer together. They depended on each other. A lot of the values that we wish we had, apparently he had. So there were ups and downs to the way John described the future.
He needed to come back and somehow grab some parts of a computer or something, didn't he?
Yes. The way John described time travel, he said you're actually stepping between multiple dimensions that are almost exactly the same. But he described his point of origin as being different from ours because Y2K happened on his timeline, but it didn't happen for us. So part of his mission involved coming back in time to get a computer system in 1975 that they needed in the year 2036 to either fix or manipulate or do something in order to compensate for the Y2K problem they had.
When you were on with me in October, I started getting emails from some IBM employees who said, Oliver Williams is telling it exactly the way it was. I mean, they had the model numbers, they had part numbers, they even knew that part that you were talking about that John needed to come back and get, the part from that computer. It was amazing.
The interesting thing was, John said that the ability that this computer had was unknown to anybody in 1975 and even when he came back. So by giving us that information, he was basically telling us something that nobody knew about, and that's when the IBM engineers came forward and said, yeah, he's telling the truth. How did he know about that? Because we were told to keep our mouths closed about that. So it's kind of interesting that a piece of information may have come from the future that nobody would have known about otherwise.
Oliver, John was pretty engaging when he was on the Internet, when he was doing his posts. Was he like in chat rooms too? How did this all happen?
Absolutely. Yeah, I am not aware of any specific chat rooms he was in. I did see transcripts of what looked like being in a chat room, but there are still websites out there that have the original posts that he would go, it was basically a forum. People would ask him questions. He would come back and answer it, and then people would ask him more questions, and that went on for quite a while.
He seemed to have no patience with some people sometimes.
That's true. There were times when John seemed to be a little confused or disoriented about, I don't know if you'd call it interpersonal relationships or the way people communicated, but there were definitely times when he seemed like he didn't quite understand what was going on. And there were also times where people would challenge him, and he got angry. There were at least 3 or 4 times where it was obvious he was not happy at all with some of the questions he was getting and some of the responses that people were having.
The other things he did, when he talked about the government and catastrophes as well, how far out did these predictions go?
As far as time?
Yes.
I would say it was basically the near future. He gave us specific dates that were later on. Like, for example, he said that in 2015, the Third World War would start. He talked about how mad cow would be a huge problem, starting to get worse, and would be bad by then. He talked about specific dates where countries would start engaging. For example, China. He went on and on about how that part of the world would change, how China would absorb Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. And we have some news links up there, of course, about how China's relationship is now changing with the rest of the world. So he did give specific dates about specific events that went out close to, I'd say, like 2020.
And then he just disappeared.
That's correct. He said he was going back to his time because he had completed his mission, and then he was just gone.
I guess what has got people concerned and frightened is that he seemed to be pretty accurate about what he talked about.
Yeah, and this is another interesting point, is that John explained that since he had come back and he was telling us these things, that they could be changed, that the future was not set. So, as an example, let's say you were a time traveler, George, and you went back to, say, 1972 or 1971, and you burned down the Watergate building.
Mm-hmm.
Would Jimmy Carter still be president? For that matter, would Ronald Reagan even be president?
Well, what do you mean, would Richard Nixon still be president?
Well, exactly. If Watergate had never happened, would Nixon have stayed president?
Right.
But at the same time, other things probably wouldn't have changed, like the computer. Microsoft would still invent Windows. AIDS would still be a problem. I mean, other things that you wouldn't have affected by that one act would still have happened. And I think a lot of people are now starting to look at the John Titor situation the same way.
Oliver, if you had the ability to go back in the time, like John Titor did, isn't it an obligation to try to save the ills of the planet? Or is it like an unwritten rule where you have to sit back and do nothing? You just monitor, you watch. Maybe you point a few things out like he did, but you just don't get involved.
I think from our perspective, the answer to that question is yes, because we would feel that we had some responsibility. But John explained that because there are so many multiple universes where the same thing is going on over and over again, there's really no point in doing anything in any particular spot that you're at, because you're really not affecting anything in the long run. In other words, if you were a time traveler and you went back and you changed something, there are an infinite number of other, places and timelines out there where it's still happening. So it's almost like a drop in the bucket. And, time travelers apparently have better things to do than try and help us.
See, if I went back into time, I'd want to take out Hitler, for example, or something like that.
Well, okay. Okay, I'll go back to an example John gave. He said that if you knew World War II was going to happen, you knew when the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor, would you go back and tell the radar operators looking for those planes that they were coming? And his point was that let's say you did that, and Pearl Harbor never happened, and we were able to knock all the Japanese out of the sky, and Pearl Harbor never happened, so therefore we don't go into World War II. Therefore, Germany develops the atomic bomb. And by the time they're bombing London or even New York, we're not even geared up for a war yet.
Like an old Twilight Zone episode, then, no matter what you do, there are always consequences.
Exactly. And that was a point he made over and over again.
So you simply have to sit back and let it unfold, as tragic as it is. I mean, here's another example. December 26, 2004. Do you go to Indonesia and run up and down the shoreline with a big foghorn and say, there's going to be a tsunami, get out of here? Would you warn people, or would you sit back and watch it happen?
That's a good question, because in the posts, he was very specific that he was not going to answer questions about natural disasters or anything where people would die like that, because his logic was that people that wouldn't have died would be alive, or people that would die would be alive, and people that might not have died would have died, and that would have had a tremendous impact on what was going to happen next.
He stayed away from sports and lotteries and scores and things like that.
Who would be president? And the logic is sound. He said, if I told you who the president was going to be, then you could go out and affect that outcome. So that was the reason why he didn't give specific information about people.
Let's assume for a moment that he was not a time traveler. I guess one could assume, though, he was a pretty, and probably still is, brilliant guy.
Yeah, that's also been talked about, and basically the outcome of that is that whoever did this, it had to be probably a group of people if he wasn't a time traveler, because he gave documents online, he talked about physics, he knew about all these other subjects that people find it very hard to believe that one person would have known all that and been able to bring it together.
If he happened to be an actual time traveler, then it makes a lot of sense, some of the things he says. And did he also not put out an illustration or take a picture? I remember seeing a picture of his time travel machine.
He took a couple of pictures of his time machine, posted them online while he was here, and he also posted a schematic of his time machine that apparently was from his operations manual, or which is what he claimed. And the interesting thing about that is there is a standing reward for anyone who can identify that machine, and so far no one's been able to do it.
And I assume wherever he went, he took it with him.
Exactly.
Now, and he did say he was from 2036 on this planet, on Earth. He didn't come from another planet?
Yeah, he claimed he was in the Army, and he was based in Tampa, Florida, is where he started from.
How old was he in 2036?
38 years old.
38 years old. So when he came back, he came back around 2000, right?
Correct.
So he was, I guess he was 2 years old at the same time while he was still here. So somewhere along the line, there was a little 2-year-old John Titor running around.
Here's another interesting point. Right now, apparently there's a lawyer representing John's family in our time just for that reason.
You got to be kidding me.
No. And apparently this lawyer has also been interviewed in this documentary that Kaku was part of. So there is a young John Titor out there somewhere and his family, and this lawyer apparently is protecting them.
This is a great story.
See, it just gets more bizarre the farther it goes along.
Now, the family was in Florida, then they went to the Midwest, right? To
Correct.
The heartland?
The information that we have now is that they moved to Omaha, Nebraska for some reason, and ironically, that was right before Florida got whacked by 4 hurricanes.
Maybe he does get involved in the past or the future. Huh?
Well, I suppose he would tell his mom, you might want to leave Florida, at least for a while.
Do you think the John Titor who came back in from time, from 2036, do we know if he really made contact with his parents?
He claims that he did. He claims that was one of the first things he did when he got here was he walked up to the front door, knocked on the door, and told them who he was.
Hi, Ma. Hi, Dad.
Yeah, I'm from the future, and I'm your son. And he talked about some of the experiences he had with his parents and the relationship that he had with his young self at the time.
You mean, and even along the way, I guess he would remember things when he was 10 and 15. Yet, how would they know that? I think
actually, I remember now. He made a couple of comments about how he had a chance to see how his parents interacted with him as a small boy, and that gave him some insight as to the type of person he was later in life.
I wonder if he lived with them.
Yeah, I got the impression from reading the Post that he did stay with them for a period of time.
What is this paradox we hear about? I saw it in Back to the Future, that if you see yourself, you run into all kinds of problems. I guess that maybe, I don't know, did that happen to this John Titor?
Apparently not. According to John, if you go back in time and kill your grandfather, it does not affect where you came from. It only affects where you are at the time. So if you were to do that and leave and return, you wouldn't be able to see the results of what you had done.
Do we know, Oliver, if he ever went into the future?
He didn't talk about that. He did say a couple of times that either he hoped to get other missions to go into the future or he didn't know if he would. But he said he went on some training missions, but he wasn't specific about where he went.
Knowing what you know about him now, if you had an opportunity to meet him today, what would you be asking him?
I would want to know why he went online. Assuming he was a real time traveler, which a lot of people do, I would like to know what was the purpose in going online, causing this controversy, making people crazy. Why did you do that? Because his philosophy was, don't get involved. I don't care. Nothing I do here can help. So why go online and talk about yourself? John said he underwent a lot of training to undergo this mission, and I got the impression that psychologically, traveling in time is not an easy thing to do. I mean, regardless of the physical problems that you're going to have, either you want to get involved or you're confused or you don't understand what's going on around you, and I could see that being a big problem.
Oliver, did he come back with the blessings of the people in that time era?
You mean from 2036?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they sent him on this mission to get this computer.
Okay, so this was not one of those things where he just decided he was going to do it and save the world.
Well, I take that back. Actually, his mission was to go to 1975 and then return, and for some reason, he ended up in the year 2000 talking to us. And that's kind of what we're all confused about, is why did he do that?
Did he ever post his picture of himself or anything like that? Do we know what he looks like?
Nope, he never posted a picture of himself.
Never described himself.
I believe at one point he may have described himself as a white male. I can't be sure about that, but I'm pretty sure that's what he said. You think you have an idea of what it's going to be like to communicate with a time traveler. And the more that you get into the story, the more you realize, hey, you know what, that's probably the way it would be. Why would a time traveler come back and tell you which horse won the race or how to get rich? I mean, that's not something that's in their best interest, because we're going to immediately lock them up and we're going to know how they travel in time. So if they're here, I hear that question all the time. If time travelers are here, where are they? Well, they're probably scared of us and they're hiding. They really have no reason to come forward.
He over this 4-month period he was online, he answered just about any question asked of him, right?
Absolutely.
He didn't stonewall.
I can't remember any questions that he avoided unless it was with the specific rules he stated, and he even answered questions more than once, which I got the impression sort of annoyed him.
I was going to say that. Why did it appear that he got annoyed with some people? I mean, he did go after some people.
Yeah, to put it bluntly, he considered us to be lazy, self-centered, civically ignorant sheep. I believe he harbored a lot of anger toward us in general for some of the things that he experienced later in life in 2034 after the war.
He blames us, huh?
Yeah, I think there is a degree that, he's looking at the way we make decisions, the way we communicate. He made specific references to how we we're going to let our Constitution slip away from us. He was angry about a lot of that, and I think that came forward in the Post.
Did he say anything about why they weren't coming back here in droves? I mean, it appeared like it was him. Maybe a few other people came back in the time. You would think that this would be going on a regular basis. And maybe it is. I don't know.
Well, okay, two parts to that, I guess, is that even now, I know that I've seen stories about NASA going on eBay to scrounge for old parts for the space shuttle because a lot of those systems aren't made anymore. So if you take that problem forward 30 or 40 years, is it reasonable to assume that it would be worth traveling in time to go back and get some old piece of equipment to fix a problem you had in the future? So some people argue about that, but I guess that's reasonable. The second thing is that the way John described time travel, it would be unlikely to see more than one time traveler around it at any given time because of the nature of multiple universes. Since there's an infinite number of places a time traveler could go, maybe John is the only time traveler we're ever going to be aware of. John was asked if there was any progress in treating cancer, and he said that they would discover or be able to use viruses to treat cancer. This is back in the year 2000. And sure enough, there's a whole bunch of news now about how they're using viruses to treat cancer, and they're successful at it. Another one is there is now serious math behind the fact that it is possible to travel backwards in time. That was on the BBC site. Also, it was an article written by a physics teacher at the University of Washington. His name is Dr. John Kramer. And he wrote an article, it was an interview about creating black holes at CERN, which is what John described was the mechanism for making his time machine work. And a lot of the statements that he was making were almost mirror images of what John had said when he was here in the year 2000. And I got a hold of him, and I think he thought I was kind of a kook because it's a little difficult to approach professionals when you want to talk about time travel. But he had never heard of John Titor, and, you know, according to him, there's some serious science and physics and math now behind the statements that John was making in the year 2000.
I'm telling you, Titor was either a bona fide time traveler or the guy was a genius because he understood physics, mathematics, history, the human mind. He knew it all.
He knew how to pull people's strings, too, when he was online. If he was not a time traveler, he knew what he was doing when he was talking to these people. But
was he supposed to leave behind some kind of film or video?
Yeah, one of the things he said was that he was going to try and have his departure videotaped, and then he was going to send it to somebody. And so far, that tape has not shown up.
Of the things you've investigated about John Titor, Oliver, what has fascinated you the most, perplexed you, scared you? Any one thing?
Lately, I would say it's this physics information coming out that's backing up a lot of what John talked about. Because I read these articles, and it just bewilders me that 5 years ago, everybody would have said this was ridiculous, and now they're taking it seriously. And he said this was going to happen. I mean, lately, that's what's been disturbing me the most.
So whoever it might be has got to have a pretty good knowledge about the physics, science, earth changes, you name it.
I mean, for a while there, most people were convinced whoever this was worked at CERN, and that's the only way they could have known that these things were going to happen. But he was very, very clear, you know, that it was family, then his community, then his county, and then the nation. And he was very steadfast about that.
He talked about civil war in this country, and that one I hope he's wrong about. Oliver, though John Titor has and was posting around 2000, you stumbled across his postings in 2002. How did that happen for you?
Yeah, actually, I had a friend of mine who told me about the posts. I went online, I started reading them, and the thing that struck me was his first major prediction was he said CERN would announce in 2001 they expect to be able to make black holes in this new facility coming online. And when that came out, after he had made the prediction, that's when this thing started picking up steam.
Do you think the John Titor story is real?
You know, again, I go back and forth. Some days I think this is just fun and it's not real, and then there are other days where I read things in the news and I go, you know, I cannot understand how they are nailing this like the way that they are. I just don't understand how it's happening.
See, and if this is what pulls me also, if time travel is possible in the future, and I just said it, I think it will be, then there's no reason why they couldn't come back. And so it's possible.
True, but again, I'll go back to the point I made a little earlier. Think about your preconceived notion of what a time traveler is. Maybe we've got it all wrong. If a time traveler shows up, how do we know for sure that they know the future? You know, if time changes based on the way time travelers show up and change things, then they don't know the future either. And the only way to prove that they're a time traveler is to actually take you in the machine and travel someplace else, and then you have the same problem. So this whole question about where are the time travelers, if time travel is real, well, they don't want to show themselves because they're going to be taken to some lab and their time machine's going to be taken apart, and I'm sure they're going to be spending a lot of miserable time doing that.
Did John Titor leave quietly, in a huff? What happened?
No, he announced, a month before he left, he said, what he said was he had certain windows that he could leave. I think he explained it has something to do with gravity or, he's got the way that he traveled, but he couldn't just leave when he wanted to. And he said that one of the windows was coming up in March of 2001, and he told everybody he was leaving, and after that date, nobody ever heard from him again.
He was a man of his word. Even if it is a fraud, the guy must have been very intelligent.
Well, the argument is that more than one person did this if it was a fraud, that there's just no way.
Like a group of people.
Right. Huh. Somebody knew about drawing, somebody knew about computers, somebody knew about physics. So it's, a group of people that came together and did this.
If you very briefly met John Titor, time traveler, what would you ask him?
I guess I would ask him where we are now, what can we do to avoid what he was trying to warn us about.
Back about a year ago, I talked with Larry Haber. He is the attorney representing time traveler John Titor's family. I wanted to talk with the mother as well. She didn't want to go on the radio, but she did promise to call into Larry's office, and we relayed questions to her through Larry Haber, the attorney. Let me first of all ask you if Kay saw a John Titor from the future John Titor.
She's telling me that when he left in March of 2001, she hasn't seen the older version of him since then.
Has the 8-year-old John Titor met the adult John Titor from the future?
They were together for the 3 years when John was here. The future John was here in the past, I should say.
Larry, how did she first come about and meet the John Titor from the future? How did that all occur for her?
In April of 98, he visited them in Florida and stayed for a couple of months, then came back in June and spent the next 3 years with them, but knew how to find him because obviously he knew where he was living back then.
Why did she believe this individual who would probably show up at their doorstep and say, "Hi, Mom, I'm John Titor."
John, right.
Yeah.
She says to first meeting she knew it was him, but it took her about a day to really accept it or figure it out that it was real, or that it really could be real. I don't think she still was convinced that quickly, but she's telling me how I'm trying to repeat the words. How could a mother not know her son, basically?
Even if he's much older.
Right.
Was she proud of him?
Basically terrified.
Terrified of him? Why?
Terrified. I think it's for the same reason, not wanting to be on the phone now or get more involved than this way. Just when you get hit with something like that, she said, basically, I'm not that sophisticated a person, and to get hit with something like that, it was, why would my son come back? What's wrong in the future? What's going to happen to us? What's going to happen to everybody, and so on. So it took her a while to get over the fear. Very afraid, very fearful. Quite almost terrified, I think, given the way her voice sounds.
Is she pretty well convinced that John went back to his own time era, or has he moved on to other time periods?
She doesn't personally believe he went anywhere else. He really didn't enjoy what he went to do the first time around, and she thinks that he probably would have stayed and not accepted taking another assignment.
Okay, so if I understand you, she thinks that John Titor from the future is still here in our time period.
No, is in his current time frame in the future.
She went back.
Didn't do any more time traveling, right.
Okay.
And that's part of the reason why he probably hasn't been back here.
Understand. You may be the only attorney to represent a family or a time traveler from the future.
And I am very interested in the sciences and the possibility of that, so I keep going along, and hopefully I'll find out too someday.
Bob Mitchell, of course, is a Canadian author, journalist. He's covered crime and sports for the Toronto Star for more than 35 years. Bob, good to have you with us.
Thanks, George, and it's a pleasure to be able to introduce to the world the real John Titor II. And it's not the John Titor that people knew about in 2000. He has nothing to do with that person. That person, I think all his predictions never came true, and the way he time traveled, in the back of a Chevy Corvette, which was very similar to the movie Back to the Future.
Back to the Future,
DeLorean.
yeah.
It just smelled right from the beginning, and it did cause some concern to the real John Titor the second, and that's what we called him, John Titor the second. And you can't time travel with a car. The only way you can time travel is through a spaceship.
Somebody reportedly called Art, back in 2001, but as you say, it might not have been the John Titor.
No, it definitely wasn't. I mean, people have to understand that time travel is an actual thing that the United States government basically has hidden from the public. They've been doing it since the late 70s, and John was the head of the time travel division of an elite unit in the United States Air Force, and his command actually went from 2030 to 2036. He never actually lived any life at all in the early, 80s, 90s. It was all in the future, and he decided to come back and live here because he had a love interest, who was one of the time travelers.
Tell us, Bob, how did you get in touch with him? How did this happen?
Essentially, Jason got on the internet and looked up every John Titor he could find, and it clicked.
And he found him, huh?
Found him, and I think his first conversation with him lasted about 4 hours.
Jeez.
And then I got talked to him, I think, the next day, and mine lasted about the same time.
Now, Bob, what was it about this John Titor that convinced you or still makes you believe that he's a real deal?
We did, I don't know how many interviews, but we did them on Skype so we could see each other.
Yeah.
John never backed down or he told us right up front that there were some things he wasn't going to be allowed to tell us. And that was fine because we didn't know what we were going to be told. But when he started telling us stuff, it was more like he was remembering things that he had gone through rather than making things up. And it was just an easy flow of conversation. He's a very jovial person. He's not in good health. He just comes across as a sincere person. And at the same time, he seemed compelled that this book had to come out at least before September 30th. And then he called us up one day and said, it needs to come out September 1st. And because things are happening in the background that they're not nice. There's things happening with Russia and Iran that are speeding up the timeline.
And he already knows what's going to happen, doesn't he?
He knows what's going to happen, and he's concerned that the timeline has been changed again, even from what is written in the book. Well,
now this first John Titor that would post on bulletin boards, on the artbell.com website, that person even called this show. How did that person know to call himself John Titor and all that if the original John Titor had not been disclosed yet? I'm curious. How did that happen?
Yeah, that was one of the questions we tried to figure out. And it may seem like a flippant answer, but I think the original John Titor was John Titor.
You're saying the initial John Titor who was posting things was this guy that we're going to talk to?
No. I'm saying that the name John Titor probably belonged to that original guy. But when our John Titor was training at Belsey Base, that's where he did all his training for the time traveling to begin. He woke up one day as a 27-year-old and had memories of his past childhood and where he went to school and everything like that. When John woke up in Dulce that morning, he didn't know at the time, but he was one of probably 1,000 cloned super soldiers. And later on in life, when he found out who he was and what he was, it didn't change his personality. It didn't affect him at all because he considered himself to be just as human as anybody else. But when I asked him about the name, the only thing he can think of is that when they were trying to name people, somebody had a sense of humor and said, well, let's just call him John Titor. And because I guess they had known the first John Titor because this John Titor actually became probably the top super soldier in the entire program.
Well, let's bring John in, and Bob, feel free to jump in anytime you want.
Absolutely.
An incredible story. John Titor, and of course, this is a story that was going around back around 2000, 2001, that he had entered the Air Force as an airman in the U.S. Air Force at Dulce, New Mexico, and was a time traveler. He commanded the 177th Time Travel Division, and here he is, John Titor. John, welcome to the program, and it's so good to hear you.
Thank you for having me on.
Hey, John, how you doing?
I'm good.
John, I've got a million questions to ask you. We're not going to have enough time, but let us begin at the beginning. This other person claiming to be John Titor, back around 2000, 2001, was that you or not?
No, and I think it's more misinformation than anything else. And I wondered if it was deliberate. But one of the issues that I have had with the name, someone picked that name and gave it to me. And I was part of a 4-member team, 2 males, 2 female. And essentially what went on at Dulce, New Mexico was bioresearch, cloning technology. And that technology was given to the U.S. government by gray aliens.
When you say, John, that this was given to you, I mean, do you have any recollection of your childhood or anything like that?
Oh, they can implant memories in you. They can be whatever they want them to be. Most recently, the military of Iran has come out and said that they had proof that Barack Obama is a clone. They also said that several of our presidents were cloned. And at the beginning of Barack Obama's first year in office, there were numerous death threats and plots to kill him. And there is nothing to say that one of the plots didn't succeed.
In your opinion, who are you?
I'm pretty sure that the genes that they used were from somebody else that had lived before, but more than that, I don't know. And I would not have known even that if a gray alien hadn't told me.
Now, this episode in Dulce, New Mexico, are we talking about the year 2036?
No. This is the 1970s, and it was a bioweapons lab there, and what had happened was that the U.S. government had signed agreements not just with the grays, but with the tall whites and the reptilians.
But you are, though, in your opinion, you're a time traveler.
Among other things, yes. A member of the U.S. Air Force and retired, and a time traveler, oh, yes.
All right, from the year 2036, when we've always been told that is the year that you came back to our time period, is that accurate?
In 2036, I completed my last mission and basically retired from the Air Force at that time.
How did you get back to this time period?
I used a TR-3B to travel in time. And TR-3Bs, you can find the specs on the Internet. They've been around since the late 70s. It's based on alien technology. The U.S. Air Force probably has at least 24 that are ready to go all the time. I noticed the other day there was a video clip of Air Force One being escorted.
Right.
Not less than 2 TR-3Bs.
And the TR-3B was what the Phoenix Lights were too, right, John?
Based on that technology, that was an even bigger ship that Fife Symington saw.
Yes.
Yeah. That was designed to be interstellar and to actually go to new Earth colonies, 2 off-world colonies.
John, the John Titor who talked about events that were going to occur back in 2000, 2001, he talked about civil unrest. He talked about all kinds of things. That was not you. Do you think that person, you said he may have been a plant, what do you think the intent was to create that image of a John Titor time traveler and talk about those things, about what could happen here?
I think that individual is definitely talking about things that he postulated that could happen in the future. I actually traveled as far as 2050 into the future to do research on our environment, and found that in 2050, the seas have started to die, and countries that depend on the oceans for food and making a living are in dire straits.
John, how far out do you know about our future? What year would it be?
2100.
If I ask you some specific questions, are you at liberty to tell us what may be going on?
I'll tell you.
Okay. Will there be a third world war?
Long before that.
How disastrous will that be?
Millions will die.
Oh, gosh.
What will happen is, and Bob, can I give him this information that won't compromise?
No, I think it's okay. Just also mention that the United States realized they had the ability to change the timeline for the better.
Yes. Originally, George, time travel was viewed as a way to just observe things in the past and in the future, but they thought very much in terms of the grandfather scenario, where if you go back and you have interaction with your grandfather, then your father won't be born and you won't be born. What we found was that you could actually change the timeline for the better. And it's like giving time a nudge in the right direction. And so they do that. Sometimes the change is computed to be too great and they don't try to attempt it. I wanted to prevent 9/11, and it was discussed as far as getting permission from the Joint Chiefs to do it. And I was turned down for that mission. But there were other missions that I thought were not as significant, but they wanted me to do them anyway.
Have you prevented events, John, from occurring that we have no idea what they would have been?
Yes. Well, as we speak this very moment, it is, I believe, without a doubt, we are looking at aggressive actions from Russia and Iran, and they're militarily aligned now more than ever, and that the Iranians feel that they're empowered by Allah to attack us. And in the book, I actually document how they attack us, how we were unprepared for the attack, and the steps that we took to undo what they did.
So, John, when you came back into time, you were talking about the 1970s. When you came back from 2036, how far back did you come back? Into the 1970s or even earlier?
The furthest I've gone back in time, I think, is about 200 BC.
Jeez.
And I don't know that anyone else has duplicated that. Of course, I'm no longer part of the command structure, and they don't tell me about the...
Are you stuck in this time period now, or do you still go into 2036 again, back to where you were?
The answer is that I have the means to do time travel if I feel it's necessary. I do have the means.
And continuously, how long have you been here?
Since around 2000, I'd left my wife, and then I came back within about 2 weeks of the last time I saw her, after we had not seen each other for quite some time.
John, many years ago, I interviewed an attorney from Florida. His name was Larry Haber. He claims that he was retained by your mother and father to handle this John Titor episode. And now I've got to ask you if he was legit. I know he's a lawyer down there, but his involvement, was it indeed for your family or not? And then he claims that you all moved to someplace in the Midwest, Nebraska, something like that.
I've never spoken with Larry Haber. I know of Larry Haber. And I read the book, A Time Traveler's Tale. I've looked at all the information, and I would have to discount it, but it's the name that bothers me.
Okay. Bob Mitchell, have you ever encountered a story like this before in your journalistic career?
Never. And the way Jason and I approached it was that we're telling a story by a time traveler named John Titor, and the information is so alarming in some sense. And really, when we wrote the World War III chapter, I think I turned white as a ghost.
Who wouldn't?
And that was before I knew that they had the capability of changing the time. So people who get up to that chapter and then have a fit, they need to put the book down for a few days and then get back to it again, because it's an amazing tale about how it all unfolds, and it's also an amazing tale of how the treaties we have with the Greys, the tall whites, and the reptilians. One of the key parts of the treaty is that the United States government will always be given black technology, which includes everything from time travel to who knows what, as long as they never reveal publicly that aliens exist. So there's the catch-22.
It is a catch-22.
We go to great lengths to discourage anything to confirm their existence. But in the book, we actually have photos of aliens. We have a photo of an SR-91 that replaced the SR-71. We have photos of spacecraft.
And the other interesting thing is that, and I asked John this several times, is that he says the U.S. recognizes the Greys, the reptilians, the tall whites, and has a diplomatic relationship with the Anunnaki. But at no time during any of his training, or all the time that he was with the U.S. Air Force, was he ever given any information about Palladians or Nordics.
Why not?
Or anything like that. And that's a popular species these days. And John doesn't know whether they exist or not, but they're certainly not working with the United States government.